The Ark of the Covenant, ancient power source. What if I told you that one of history's most sacred relics might actually have been a deadly electrical weapon? Picture this: ancient priests carrying what they believed was God himself in a golden box, not knowing they were handling thousands of volts of raw electricity. Well, buckle up, because we're about to dive deep into one of the most controversial theories ever proposed about the Ark of the Covenant. For centuries, explorers and treasure hunters have scoured the earth searching for this legendary chest. But here's the thing that'll blow your mind. What if they've been looking for the wrong thing entirely? What if the Ark wasn't just a holy relic, but an incredibly sophisticated piece of ancient technology that modern science is only now beginning to understand? Let me take you back over 3,000 years to the scorching deserts of Sinai, where, according to biblical accounts, something extraordinary happened. Moses received detailed instructions to build a very specific box, and I mean incredibly specific. We're talking precise measurements, exact materials, and construction methods that seem almost well engineered. The instructions were crystal clear. Build it from acacia wood, make it 45 inches long, 27 inches wide, and 27 inches deep. Then, and here's where it gets interesting, line the entire thing, inside and out, with pure gold. Top it with a solid gold lid called the mercy seat, and place two golden winged figures facing each other with their wings spread wide. Finally, thread wooden poles through golden rings so it could be carried without anyone actually touching the box itself. Now, here's where things get properly mental. The Bible doesn't just describe a pretty golden chest. It describes something that erupted in showers of sparks and flames. Something that killed people who touched it. Something that could lay waste to entire armies. That's not your typical storage box, is it? I'm standing here in the middle of the Sinai Desert, surrounded by thousands of square miles of nothing but sand and According to biblical accounts, this is where Moses stood when he received those construction plans. But what if those weren't instructions for a holy relic? What if they were blueprints for something far more incredible? One scientist has put forward a theory so controversial, so mind-bending, that it's turned archaeology on its head. He believes the Ark of the Covenant was actually an ancient capacitor. Essentially, a massive electrical battery built 3,000 years before we supposedly invented electricity. I know it sounds absolutely bonkers, but stay with me on this one. To test this wild theory, we've assembled a team of experts who are going to do something that's never been attempted before. Build a working replica of the Ark using nothing but the biblical instructions as our guide. And then we go in to try to fire the bloody thing up and see if we can generate enough electricity to light up a room, or possibly kill someone. The team includes master craftsman Dawn, who has built furniture for film stars and royalty, but has never tackled anything quite this ancient or potentially lethal. There's also electrical engineer Corey, who specializes in high-voltage transformers and is convinced the Ark was some form of prehistoric power source. Leading this mad experiment is John, a maverick scientist who has spent decades studying electromagnetic fields and believes he has cracked the code of ancient technology. But why would the Ark be so dangerous? Well, here's where the theory gets really fascinating. Some experts reckon it might have contained radioactive particles from meteorites. Others think it could have been some sort of nuclear device. But John's theory is different, and it's actually testable. Picture this scenario. You're carrying this golden box across the blazing desert for weeks on end. The two metal cherubs on top are constantly collecting static electricity from the dry air and heat. The hard acacia would act as a perfect insulator, separating the gold-lined interior from the gold-covered exterior. Gradually, One side builds up a positive charge while the other becomes negatively charged. The voltage keeps climbing and climbing until eventually you've got enough stored electricity to light up a small town. Now imagine some poor soul decides to touch this thing without knowing what it really is. Bang! They'd get hit with thousands of volts of electricity and quite literally be thrown across the room. If they survived at all, they'd certainly think they'd just encountered the wrath of God. John puts it bluntly. This thing could build up thousands of volts of energy and discharge like a massive spark. It won't just hurt you, it'll kill you. Anyone who touched it would have been kicked clear across the room. While the team in Canada battled against time to build this potentially lethal replica, I'm staying here in Egypt to piece together the ancient heritage behind it. And we've only got 4 weeks to pull this off. Back in the workshop, Dan's working with long planks of Canadian acacia, cutting them down to those precise biblical measurements. Using ancient cubits as his guide, he's calculated the exact dimensions. As a master craftsman who's worked on pieces that are 300 to 400 years old, he's excited about the challenge of recreating something from 3,000 years ago. Meanwhile, John's diving deep into electromagnetic theory. In the 1980s, he pioneered research into intense electromagnetic effects on different materials. The results were absolutely mental. Metal discs levitating off tables, wooden planks fusing with metal rods, solid metal balls turning liquid, and heavy equipment lifting off the floor. They called it the Hutchinson effect. And whilst it's controversial, many scientists have validated his groundbreaking work. John is convinced that Moses might have been more than just a religious leader. He might have been an electrical genius. Think about it. If you could demonstrate sparks and mysterious glowing effects coming from a beautiful golden box, wouldn't that be the perfect way to convince people you were carrying the word of God? The two cherubs on top weren't just decorative, they were functional. Anyone witnessing sparks arcing between these golden figures, or seeing strange glows emanating from the mercy seat, would absolutely believe they were witnessing divine power. In an age before electricity was understood, this would have seemed like pure magic. Corey, our electrical engineer, is fascinated by how the charge might have built up in the first place. Picture the priests carrying this thing through the desert, their robes rubbing against each other, the friction from walking, the dry heat building static electricity. All of that energy could have been captured and stored in the ark like a massive capacitor, just waiting to discharge. But here's where this story takes an even more incredible turn. While the team's building our replica, I've been investigating the Egyptian connection. You see, the earliest known battery was discovered in Baghdad in 1938. Just a simple clay pot that produced less than 1 volt. But what if electrical technology actually existed much earlier than we thought? I'm heading to the Temple of Hathor at Dindara, about an hour north of the Valley of the Kings. This place houses some of the most intriguing and controversial hieroglyphics ever discovered. Deep in the crypt, underneath the oldest part of the temple, are carvings that look suspiciously like giant light bulbs connected to cables and what appear to be transformers. These mysterious hieroglyphs were first studied by British Egyptologist Alan Alford in the 1990s. When you look at them, they definitely resemble electrical equipment. Could this be evidence that the ancient Egyptians were already familiar with electricity thousands of years before we thought it was invented? The temple itself was one of the most important centers of learning in ancient Egypt, housing the largest alchemical library in the kingdom. In the Holy of Holies, the inner sanctum accessible only to high priests and the pharaoh, they performed their most secret ceremonies. And etched on these walls are images that look remarkably like the Ark of the Covenant wooden boxers with carrying poles that are virtually identical in design. But it gets even more interesting when you look at the tomb treasures found throughout Egypt. When Howard Carter discovered Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, he found numerous ceremonial boxers built to contain stone effigies of gods. One was made of gold with 2 carrying poles, and Anubis lying on top. The design is strikingly similar to the biblical description of the Ark. Even more intriguing was the young pharaoh's coffin, over which hung a large cloth tent interwoven with thousands of small bronze stars and surrounded by winged cherubim, very similar to the tabernacle described in the Bible. Dr. Zahi Hawass, an expert on Egyptian antiquities, confirms that the Ark's description matches ancient Egyptian artistic traditions perfectly. Even more remarkably, 7 of the 10 commandments appear in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which existed long before the Hebrew exodus from Egypt. This raises an absolutely mind-blowing possibility. What if Moses wasn't just a Hebrew prophet, but actually an Egyptian pharaoh? Author Ahmet Osman has spent years researching this theory, and he believes Moses was actually Pharaoh Akhenaten, the revolutionary king who declared belief in one God and fled Egypt with his followers to the Sinai desert. Just as the Bible says Moses did, Akhenaten believed in monotheism and abandoned the traditional Egyptian pantheon. When his religious revolution failed, he and his followers fled to Sinai, exactly matching the biblical Exodus story. If this is true, then the Ark of the Covenant would have been built using ancient Egyptian technology and knowledge. I've traveled deep into the Sinai to investigate this connection. In 1904, British archaeologist Flinders Petrie discovered an Egyptian temple at Serabit dating back to the time of Moses and the Exodus. This wasn't just any temple. It was a major Egyptian religious site, built on a remote mountaintop, far from the traditional centers of power. Why would the Egyptians build such an important temple so far from home? The answer might lie in the theory that Akhenaten fled here and set up his court in exile, where he and his followers could worship their one god Aton without interference. When Petrie excavated the site, he found evidence of furnaces, crucibles, and tools, along with large amounts of white powder mixed with sand. This wasn't just a temple. It was clearly some sort of workshop or laboratory. Could this have been Akhenaten's alchemical facility? Could this be where the Ark of the Covenant was actually built? Back in the tombs of the Valley of the Kings, I've been working with Ibra, whose family has lived and worked among these ancient burial sites for generations. He's made a fascinating discovery about a substance called mufkits or manna, a fine white powder that appears to be powdered gold, found in the mummies of high priests and nobles. Ibrahim believes this powder was produced using intense heat, possibly generated by electrical equipment like the Ark. The powder was considered to have life-giving properties and was placed with the dead to give them strength in their journey to the afterlife. Could this be the manna from heaven that the Bible describes being stored inside the Ark, alongside the 10 Commandments? The scientific community has shown increasing interest in what they call monatomic elements, white powders found in mining areas that contain salts of gold. If the Ark was used to produce this venerated powder of life, it's easy to understand how it gained almost mythical status and became a powerful symbol of divine power. After weeks of preparation, the moment of truth has finally arrived. Back in Canada, the team has completed their full-scale replica. Dan has used acacia wood throughout, just as the Bible describes, and like his ancient counterparts, he hasn't used a single nail, just traditional joinery techniques. The Bible describes the Ark as being lined inside and out with pure gold, but at today's prices, that would cost over £10 million. So instead, they've lined it with copper sheets, which should work just as well for conducting electricity. The 2 brass cherubs are attached to metal rods that lead down into the box. The theory is that when the Ark was carried through the desert, the heat and friction would build up a massive electrical charge. To test this, John has connected the replica to a powerful transformer that will provide 50,000 volts of electricity. If his calculations are correct, the copper chamber inside will charge up like a capacitor and then discharge in spectacular fashion between the wings of the two cherubim. As John puts it, I think it'll put on quite a light show. You definitely don't want to touch it when it's arcing. The tension is palpable as they prepare for the final test. This is either going to validate one of the most controversial theories in biblical archaeology, or it's going to be a very expensive failure. Either way, nobody wants to be anywhere near this thing when they switch it on. Right then, John announces, "Let her rip." The result is absolutely spectacular. The moment they activate the transformer, the arc charges up like a massive capacitor. Electricity arcs between the cherubim's wings in brilliant flashes of light before the intense voltage causes the brass figures to literally explode in flames. Even in a modern warehouse in Canada, it's easy to see how people 3,000 years ago would have viewed this as God in a box. The sheer power on display is both beautiful and terrifying. "Bloody hell!" Don exclaims as they survey the smoking remains of the cherubim. That's a lot of energy to do that. That's mega voltage. John's grinning despite the destruction. It did arc, that's for certain. I don't know if we've proved it killed people or threw fire at armies, but we've definitely proved it's possible that it could have been a capacitor. Although the theory remains controversial, the experiment has moved us closer to proving that the ark could indeed have been an electrical device of some sort. Perhaps it was connected to the ancient light bulbs and electrical equipment depicted on Egyptian tomb walls. Perhaps it was part of a lost technology that we're only now beginning to understand. The truth is, we may never know for certain what the Ark of the Covenant really was. Like so much about this ancient land, it could have been part of a lost knowledge, a forgotten technology enshrined on the walls of tombs and temples for thousands of years. But here's what we do know. Whether it was a holy relic or an ancient electrical device, the Ark of the Covenant represents something extraordinary. It shows us that our ancestors were far more sophisticated than we often give them credit for. They were capable of engineering, of science, of creating things that still baffle us today. So the next time someone tells you that ancient peoples were primitive, remember this story. Remember that 3,000 years ago, someone built a box that could generate enough electricity to kill. Whether they called it the wrath of God or understood it as electrical engineering doesn't really matter. What matters is that they did it. And that, my friends, is absolutely brilliant. If you've enjoyed this journey into one of history's greatest mysteries, make sure you give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more incredible stories from our ancient past. Trust me, there are plenty more mind-blowing discoveries waiting to be explored. Until next time, keep questioning everything you think you know about history, because the truth is often far stranger than fiction. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, please like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!